I am so happy to see you. You will not believe.
Get back, you fool! Your stupid lawn is obscuring the animal musk!
All my fists.
If any of you have watched my latest video, The Legacy of a Chapter Silent Hill, you would know that although I normally enjoy making Why No One Uses videos, they tend to be a little tricky to create. They lean towards more negative elements of the game, and my personality normally reflects that, as we are looking at the reasons why perks are rarely seen. And I feel that the game is drowning in enough negativity that my points don't need help supporting that bit. Regardless, as I said back then, I am not done with the series, as there are a decent number of things I still have points of discussion to raise. And obviously the biggest demand many of you have asked was a video on Huntress. Huntress is a bit of a strange creature, as she is by far one of the most popular killers in the game, not only because of her visual intrigue, but also because of her power concept. Woman who throws hatchets is both extremely simple enough for new players to understand, but just somehow complex enough that it has led many into turning her into a trebuchet. Now obviously Huntress is a character many love and others love to hate, but unfortunately her perks have never received as much attention as her. If anything, the only thing they each have going for them is the label of worst perks for any killer to release with. Which is quite impressive that no one has beaten her quite yet. No, Lady Merchant, at least your perks got an update to be somewhat tolerable. Speaking about updates, all three of Huntress's perks have only received minor alterations to their numbers, which is quite a surprise, especially considering that Behavior have wanted perks that are rarely seen to receive major updates in recent years. Now obviously Behavior have a lot on their plate. After all, they have a ton of perks that need major alterations, or just simple number adjustments. But I cannot help but be surprised that of all the perks to receive updates, Huntress have been placed on the waiting list for so long. Then again, when thinking about what perks Huntress did get, I can also kind of understand why Behavior have been rather reluctant on updating them. Starting our descent into madness, let's cover the one perk that many players tend to fish out of the garbage and has at least received some play, that being Hex Huntress's Lullaby. This is a rather interesting perk, as it is considered by many to be the weakest Hex perk in the entire game. And I cannot help to both agree and disagree with that fact. Don't get me wrong, it's a stupidly weak Hex perk, but as a concept this perk has the chance to be really good, and we have seen this with one build in particular. Before going into that build, let's talk numbers, and explain what Hex Huntress's Lullaby even does first. As it is a Hex, a random totem at the start of the trial is converted into Huntress's Lullaby, where upon hooking a survivor, the perk gains a token, maxing at 5. For each token collected, the time for generator and healing skill check audio cues are reduced, starting at 14% at 1 token, and ending at 56% at 4 tokens. Once you collect the 5th and final token, the audio cue is completely suppressed. Additionally, if a player misses any healing or generator skill checks, the penalty is increased by 6%. All of the effects for Hex Huntress's Lullaby are removed once the Hex totem is broken. Let's get the obvious issues with the perk out of the way first, starting with the fact that Huntress's Lullaby is a Hex perk. Hexes have been a rather odd kind of perk within Dead by Daylight, where at first they were welcomed with open arms with unique power concepts, they are now degraded into becoming cannon fodder for the ever-almighty Hex Pentimento. All jokes aside, the concept of hexes have always been perks that have extremely potent effects, but can also pop like a balloon the moment a survivor finds their hiding spot. To help reduce this event from happening, Behavior have attempted many times to introduce other hexes and totem support to deal with delaying the totem's destruction. Perks like Throughout the Hunt, Haunted Grounds, Undying, to even outside of the Hex archetype of dominance. Behavior have introduced a variety of perks that help keep main totems alight, while providing funny gotcha moments to the survivors when they don't expect it. Now, although all the support that Hex totems have received over the years have been wonderful, Hex Huntress's Lullaby is sadly unable to capitalize on it. You see, unlike other Hex perks that exist in the game, Huntress's Lullaby has found itself forming around the impossible skill check build. This is a rather interesting build within the game, as it is one of the oldest meme builds that has remained popular, at least to an extent. But the biggest flaw the build suffers from is its need of specific perks to function. As such, the ability to run Hex support to keep Huntress's Lullaby alight is almost impossible, as it has the chance of jeopardizing the build and its game plan as a whole. As such, you need to run Hex Huntress's Lullaby without any defenses, and that puts the power of the perk in a lot more trouble. Speaking about the impossible skill check build, it is a build that crops up every once in a while, especially more often in lower MMR, but it's a meme build that has managed to stand the test of time. Whenever a new meme build enters the game, behavior either leave the build to rot, or rework the perks that support the meme to instead focus on something else. Impossible skill check is different, as not only has the build remained rather static when it comes to balance, but it has also received a decent amount of new support over the years. Perks like Oppression, Merciless Storm, Undone, even No Quarter provide new and interesting dynamics for the different impossible skill check builds. But it is important to note that the build is very niche. Not many killers have the ability to run impossible skill check, and only one truly turns the build from a meme into an actual nightmare, and that is the Doctor. The only other killers who could consider running impossible skill checks is Freddy, but even before the rework, the perk options you had were very limited. And I know people will bring up Skull Merchant, but she can't really do much after behavior got her that wheelchair. Doctor is realistically the only killer who can weaponize the build to the absolute degree. And considering Doctor already has other build paths to follow too, it reduces the pick rates of all the impossible skill check related perks. That is not the second problem with Hex Huntress's Lullaby. Instead, it is something that I want to briefly mention for the perk, as it is so heavily tied to the build that it will fluctuate with pick rate, depending on how popular the build is. Instead, the second problem is the fact that behavior had been introducing new perks for the build. With how little support the build had back in the Dark Ages, you didn't run Hex Huntress's Lullaby because it was good, instead it was because it was all you had. But with new support comes new options. As I mentioned, perks like Oppression and Merciless Storm have seen a great amount of value for impossible skill check, and although there are some failed attempts, like with Undone, there are also others that try new things out, like No Quarter and Corlophobia. Impossible skill check has many different variants within the game now, but Hex Huntress's Lullaby has always remained a pocket pick for most who run the build. It is still important to mention how the build has changed over time with its new support though, as we are talking about a niche build belonging to realistically one killer and a dream. As we are seeing new options making the ranks, it makes sense that the perk will be swapped out, especially to lean more into either more consistency or other minigame antics. The final problem that Hex Huntress's Lullaby suffers from is one that I mentioned a little earlier in the video, and that has to do with the philosophy of Hex totems. As I mentioned, hexes tend to have very strong effects to warrant how demented they can be with spawn locations, but it is where Hex Huntress's Lullaby falls apart. Unlike other hexes' effects, Huntress's Lullaby's effect is rather weak, as you need to build its tokens up to gain its full power. This is not uncommon, as we have seen hex perks like this, from Hex Devour Hope to even Plaything and Pentimento. The difference, however, is the reward that you fetch for your efforts. Plaything and Pentimento have become a notorious combo in the game, as being able to force Oblivious onto players and making them choose between that versus a repair penalty is very annoying. Then obviously we have Devour Hope, which slows the game down dramatically for players to find the totem, else they will be entering the Shadow Realm a lot earlier than intended. In comparison to these perks, Huntress's Lullaby and its sound manipulation is not all that great. Granted, it can influence games at lower MMRs, but that is because Leon and Sable players are still learning to turn their modders on. Compared to the other hexes in the game, it takes too long for Huntress's Lullaby to fetch its full strength, especially considering how minute of an effect it truly has when used outside of impossible skill check. I would give the perk a break, considering its age, but Devour Hope and Ruin existed in the game literally 2 chapters before it, so I'm sorry, I have no clue on why behavior made its effect so weak compared to then. Going over the perk's faults once again, it's a hex totem that unfortunately cannot access outside hex support without complicating the impossible skill check build. New tools have arrived to dethrone the perk from its main build, and the cost is just too high for its reward. These issues for Hex Huntress's Lullaby has resulted in players calling the perk bad, but in reality it's not as severe as they put it. Huntress's Lullaby is not the greatest perk, but it does still have tools to help with what it is attempting to support with impossible skill checks. There was a video I watched by Minskull, where he coined Hex Huntress's Lullaby as a win more perk. In simple terms, win more is a term from card games, where the effect of the card is only useful when you are actively winning, which raises the question on why you even brought it, instead of other cards to tackle flaws or push the strategy even further. I can personally see where Minskull is coming from by calling Huntress's Lullaby a win more perk, but I wish to use a different example to properly show a real win more perk, and that is Undone. Undone is a recent perk that has entered the game with the All Things Wicked patch, and it has the effect of gaining tokens from missed skill checks, maxing at 30. Once you kick a generator, it loses total progress depending on the number of tokens, and is blocked for that duration as well, with the perk then going on a 60-second cooldown, because of course. The idea of Undone is cute. Having a burst of damage from the faults of survivors is a great concept for impossible skill checks, but the problem is that for the perk to fetch its full value, you may as well be winning at that point. If every survivor is constantly missing skill checks and not completing the generators, there is little progress that exists on the board, and you are pretty much deleting any progress with that burst, which would have already been very minor depending on the tokens gained. There already exist other gen kick perks for impossible skill check, like Oppression and Overcharge, that support the build well, and help with consistency boosting, and playing around with the build's gimmick. In comparison, Undone truly only obtains value when the game has already been won for you, but Huntress's Lullaby is a little bit different. Unlike Undone, which provides no value except when you are already winning, you do gain a boost to miss skill check penalties, which combos nicely with Merciless Storm. Additionally, as the perk does begin to grow in strength, it leads into players attempting to look for the totem to help reduce the build strength, which gives you time to go for hooks and even more tokens. Even after the totem is destroyed, it is still a time sink the survivors had to waste, which you use to apply pressure on the map. Against a well-coordinated team, the perk does end up having more of a win more identity, especially as it will begin to struggle, but compared to Undone, it still has its elements to support the build. Now when it comes to changes for Hex Huntress's Lullaby, this is where things get tough. I personally think Huntress's Lullaby is not as bad as many make it out to be, but that has to do with my perk philosophy. As I have said many times in previous videos, I believe what makes a good perk is when it has a job and it fulfills it well, and Huntress's Lullaby does have its place, as the perk fulfills a unique niche for impossible skill checks. As such, I don't think it needs immediate changes, but I am willing to offer a few adjustments for the perk if behavior ever wishes to experiment with the idea. The first batch of changes are focused on pushing the perk more into its impossible skill check identity, trying to trim the fat of the perk and making its cost not as high with a more reasonable reward. Instead of needing 5 tokens, you will now only need 4, and each token will reduce the audio cue by 25%. Once you hit the 4th token, the sound cue is completely silent and the totem is made completely unbreakable. The discussion of making the totem immune to cleansing has been tossed around by many in the community, and I believe it is a reasonable reward for how the perk functions. It already warns players once one token has been gathered, and considering how easy it is to disrupt the perk, I found reducing its token count by 1 was fair enough. Plus, if players do end up running the perk on more killers, it allows for more variation to the impossible skill check build, which would be nice to see. The second batch of changes are instead focused on a different direction. One of the best ways to improve a perk's pick rate and popularity is by giving it a varied gameplay style, and although I don't believe the perk needs that kind of treatment, it is a change I think that can be discussed. The second buff option is more of a complete rework to how the perk works, and focuses more on its hex identity. At the start of the trial, all dull totems are ignited and turned into Huntress Lullaby totems. For each totem that belongs to Huntress's Lullaby, you gain 1 token, granting the boosts that it currently has now. If you run other hex totems with Huntress's Lullaby, the perk only converts the leftover dull totems, so if you run 2 hexes with Huntress's Lullaby, you only have 3 tokens. On a side note, no, Pentimento does not refresh the tokens. I know someone will probably ask that, so let's get that one out of the way. This rework to Huntress's Lullaby, in short, is a flip of the perk's power dynamic. Instead of building your strength up, you are starting strong and giving the opposing players the choice to break totems to weaken the perk's effects. Now obviously this change would make Huntress's Lullaby the greatest support tool for Pentimento, but let's be real here. Pentimento just needs a nerf at this point. I am looking at a brighter future with this rework. Also, I just want to live the scene from Yu-Gi-Oh! Where Yugi places his Dark Magician under 4 different magical hats. It would be funny going, "Ooh, wouldn't you like to know what my Devour Hope is hiding?" In a sense, it turns Huntress's Lullaby to be a powerful Hex support tool, as you are hiding your main Hex behind 4 duds of Huntress's Lullabies. Now when it comes to which change I prefer, I kinda like them both. They provide unique gameplay adjustments for the perk, while maintaining its core identity. But if I had to choose, for balance I go with the first, but for the funny I go with the second. Overall, Hex Huntress's Lullaby is fine. It's a perk that's not screaming for immediate attention like the other Huntress perks, but at the same time it has a unique concept that allows for interesting directions for changes. I do think behavior could get away with unique changes for the perk, either to enhance its usage for Hex builds or to boost its impossible skill check synergy. But either way, at least it's not Hex 2 can play.
What the? SpongeBob, aren't you two supposed to be camping?
We are camping.
SpongeBob, it's not camping if you're 10 feet from your house.
The next perk we are going to talk about is one of the 2 perks that belongs to Huntress that has received the most changes. That's right, guys, gals, and other pals. Territorial Imperative has received not 1, but 2 adjustments over its almost 8 years of existence. This joke would have been even better if behavior didn't jump the gun and buff the other Huntress perk, but this is the world I live in, and I am meant to suffer. Okay, I'm being a little pessimistic here, but in reality the perk has actually been a little strange, as it has seen a bit of traction compared to years before. If you were to take a look on nightlight.gg, which is where I collect my stats to use for videos, as you may know, there are random spikes where the perk had subtle boosts in pick rate. Now as for why it has seen these boosts, I have absolutely no idea. It's a complete enigma. One could say it spiked for unknown reasons. Okay, the joke is getting old, and it's getting old fast. After a particular goth, who is the evil's best friend, spawned into existence, there was an introduction of basement-related perks for the survivors. This ended up turning what was considered the killer's strongest location into the survivor's newest lounging area, with self-healing, unhooking, and of course, invocations. This has only been expanded upon by the Scottish cultist Tory, and as such, the perk saw a boost when invocation got buffed, resulting in the perk adopting a counter-perk identity. Counter-perks are rather unique to the game, as they are designed to damage control certain perk types and playstyles when they get too out of hand. There aren't many counter-perks in Dead by Daylight, but common examples of them are Franklin's Demise, Counterforce, and Lightborn. Yet even with this new adopted identity for Territorial Imperative, it still has flaws. But before we get to them, let's first cover what the perk does. Its effect is relatively simple. After a survivor enters the basement while you're 24 meters away from it, you see their aura for 6 seconds. The perk then goes on a 45-second cooldown. The first issue is a very blatant one, and that is the fact that its reward is too low for the costs. There are many perks in Dead by Daylight that have reasons for specific restrictions, such as potent effects or ease of activation, but Territorial Imperative is a complete opposite to those kinds of perks. Territorial only activates when a survivor enters the basement, unless the player is running one of the basement-themed perks or is just looking to farm a chest. There is no real reason for survivors to go into the basement. Additionally, the only reward you are fetching is 6 seconds of an aura read, which I know most people would agree is actually nice, but not for a perk that only activates from a survivor entering the basement. Look at this jokester trying to be an edgy I'm all ears. Then there is also the range restriction, but don't worry, we will get to that one soon. Long story short, the perk has a lengthy cooldown, a range requirement, and the addition for the survivor to enter the basement just for an aura read of 6 seconds. I know that aura reading can be quite powerful, but I don't think a 6-second aura read needs to have 3 restrictions tied to it. With that logic, Predator would be considered an affront to nature. Speaking about obscene, let's look at the basement part of the perk next. as you don't even get an aura read on the survivor if you are too close to it. This is the second issue the perk suffers from, and that is the fact that there is a range restriction on the perk. Now many of you may be wondering, why on earth does this restriction even exist? And the logic has to do with basement camping. Territorial Imperative used to be a popular meme option on Insidious Basement Bubba, but more realistically, it had its time on a basement camping build on Demogorgon. This video from Oddstarva is rather old, and shows a blast from the past of Gashaven, but it does show off Territorial being at its quote-unquote peak. The idea is simple. You plant the portal near the top of the basement, hook a survivor inside, and when you see the perk activates, you go for the teleport immediately. Combined with Make Your Choice, and you could keep a player inside the basement most of the time. This playstyle also worked with Hag with her mint rag, but let's be real here. I only bring Hag up as to allow us to forget about her existence for another year as soon as possible. This playstyle, however, has been tackled slowly by behavior, with the introduction of base kit borrowed time, and new perks that have arrived to slowly dampen the negative gameplay style of Territorial. The restriction at this point is just a remnant of old balancing decisions, from all the way back when behavior had no clue on how to balance the perk. Hey, glad to see some things never change. Okay, the final problem, and you may notice I am blitzing through these problems a lot faster compared to Huntress's Lullaby, and that is because it is an extremely simple perk with extremely simple problems. As for that final problem, it's a very easy one to understand. The perk is just boring. This is sadly the case for most counter perks. They just exist to prevent a perk or gameplay style from getting too out of control. But of the limited counter perks to exist in the game, behavior have at least introduced new tools to influence their gameplay styles. Franklin's demise combined with Weave Attunement created a brand new dynamic for the perk, and there exist certain killers who can turn delightful items into death traps. Even Lightborn can have its fun against survivors, as you watch them pathetically trying to blind you, failing to realize you brought your spare shades for the match. Territorial in comparison is just very plain. It reveals a survivor's aura, then calls it a day. This is a simple problem, but it is one that affects many perks and their popularity within the game, as passive perks tend to not see much play as the more dynamic perks draw the player's attention much more often. As simple as Territorial Imperative is with its effect, its problems are just as simple. The perk has too heavy of a cost for its reward. The range restriction punishes good players more than the more malicious ones, and the sheer fact that the perk is very dull to begin with all combine to bring the perk down. Realistically, I believe Territorial needs a much larger set of changes, as although it has adopted a rather cute counter perk identity for invocations, it's just simply too boring to play around with. And the worries of Territorial being a basement camping perk can be annoying to deal with. When it comes to the first list of changes for Territorial, I recommend either removing the cooldown or the range restriction. I believe that there should still be a limit to how powerful Territorial should be as a counter perk, but at the same time, the number of restrictions are simply too much. I believe removing either of the restrictions would be a good short-term direction, foreseeing the perk just a little more, but keeping the ability for invocation players to still have a chance to sneak by and use their perks. The second concept of changes is a complete revamp of Territorial Imperative, seeking to keep the perk's name, while taking it away from the basement. After kicking a generator, it is marked by Territorial Imperative until it stops regressing. If any survivor were to enter a 16-meter range of the marked generator, their aura is revealed for 10 seconds. Territorial Imperative has a cooldown of 30 seconds that starts after kicking a generator. Simply put, it's a Trail of Torment but with aura reading, but I suspect the perk would instantly become a cult classic. Trap-based perks have always been fairly popular on both sides, and I suspect that this rework would result in a ton of new synergies, and introduce dynamic playstyles as a result. Granted, it does lean more into defense-heavy or even 3-gen playstyles, but with the changes to generator kicks being limited, I suspect it could be stable enough. When it comes to which change would be better, I prefer Territorial being reworked. I did say the perk adopting identity as a counter perk to invocations was a cute concept, but it is because it was more so a happy accident from an already fairly weak perk. As for if I would want the rework I made, it all depends on how fair it would be to face. Plus, behavior can be smart at times, they may think of something much greater. Territorial Imperative is an awkward perk when it comes to its history. It has always remained a fairly unpopular option with its weak effects, and the only time it began to see play was as a counter tool to a new perk type. It's an ancient perk that is in desperate need of attention, whether to enhance its counter identity or to push it towards a new direction altogether. But one thing we can all agree on is that the next perk needs much more changes than this one. Remember when I said earlier that Territorial Imperative had a simple effect with a simple list of problems? I wish the same could be said about Beast of Prey. The perk's effect is extremely simple to grasp. You gain the undetectable status effect once you enter Bloodlust Tier 1, with a 50% bonus increase to BP through the Hunter category. Although simple to understand, there is a ton to break down, as this perk is genuinely, in my opinion, one of the worst perks behavior has ever made. Now that may sound very over the top, but by providing the 3 flaws the perk suffers from, you will begin to see why this is the case. Also, I know the perk got changed on the recent PTB, and I will be talking about that royal mess after I cover how bad of a perk it has been for almost 8 years. The first problem with Beast of Prey is immediately the requirement to obtain the benefits of Beast of Prey, that being to fetch Bloodlust Tier 1. This was done mostly as Bloodlust was introduced one patch before the release of Huntress and David King, and so, as expected, Behavior wanted to introduce new toys to play with the concept and experiment around with it. Unfortunately, this never went anywhere after Beast of Prey, and for very obvious reasons. To obtain Bloodlust Tier 1, you will need to chase a survivor uninterrupted for 15 seconds. This means you cannot use your power, you cannot break pallets or breakable walls, you cannot break chase for more than 5 seconds, and once you land a hit, you have to do the whole song and dance all over again. Long story short, the requirement to fetch Bloodlust is a very difficult path to follow, and is normally only done for killers who have nothing to help them secure a damage state without it. The system was introduced to support killers who struggled with powerful tiles in the game, as the maps and pallet spawns at the start of Dead by Daylight's lifespan was an absolute joke. Now, after all of that effort of avoiding using your power, of not breaking pallets and committing to the chase, the only thing you fetch is undetectable? Ghostface has undetectable in his kit by pressing a button, and Skull Merchant still has that, as everything else has been deleted from her kit, but even then, they are still pathetic. Now, even though undetectable can have moments of fooling the survivor, it is still not enough of a reward after all the torment you had to endure to fetch it. What is even worse is that the reward for obtaining undetectable is the same word that would be used for survivors' chances of staying in a match who brought map offerings and begin to lose. Flaky. You see, for the longest time there was no duration for how long Beast of Prey would last, like other perks. Instead, its duration was as long as you had Bloodlust. So let me repeat myself. You kept undetectable, as long as you did not lose that Bloodlust. Okay, so all you have to do to keep the value of Beast of Prey is to not use your power, not break any pallets or breakable walls, do not break chase for more than 5 seconds, and of course never hit a survivor, else you have lost Beast of Prey's attention. I have seen bad requirements and restrictions on perks before, but what Beast of Prey had is beyond bad. It's nothing. You had to put in all that effort to get Bloodlust Tier 1 just for you to lose the effect of Beast of Prey almost instantly. Like, what is that? I can cause more damage with a magnifying glass on a cloudy day! This perk just does nothing. Even if you try to carry the undetectable to start chase with a different survivor, you don't have enough time to do so. The perk would break the moment you even think about trying it. As for why I bring this up, it's because Beast of Prey used to have a similar idea all the way on its release patch, but with a whole 2-minute cooldown, as that was clearly too powerful for the dark ages of DBD. Also, Behavior have recently added a 20-second timer to Beast of Prey on the PTB as well, which I was going to mention as the Lazy Man's buff option for the perk a literal month ago when writing the script, but its problems still stand. 20 seconds is insanely short of a window of time for Beast of Prey to allow you to split apart from chase and go after another player, meaning that this issue I mentioned on Beast of Prey still stands. It's not as flimsy as before, but it's still not worth it. Lastly, of course, we have the greatest flaw that the perk suffers from, One that is beyond inexcusable from the developers that we should just boycott the game at this point. The BP bonus does not increase the max capacity for the Hunter category. Like, come on, behavior. The killers want all the blood points they can get. How could you mess this up? No wonder they are removing these BP bonuses. They don't want players to see their shame. The real third problem with the perk is actually the perk's identity it was attempting to provide for players, as behavior have created other perks that fulfill that fantasy. Beast of Prey is going with the idea that you chase a survivor, and your desire to get a kill cuts you from the entity's sightlines. Well, say hello to Dark Devotion. It's an undetectable perk from Plague that swaps your terror radius onto the obsession once they lose a health state for a short duration. It's a stealth perk that provides a unique gameplay style of going ghost, while making the obsession a noisemaker. Well, what about the bloodlust element of Beast of Prey? That's still unique to the perk, right? Nope, we got Rapid Brutality, which removes bloodlust, but grants a 5% haste for 10 seconds on landing basic attacks. This is the only other perk that behavior have created that affects bloodlust in some way, and how it manipulates it is by shutting it off completely, with the reward of haste boosting on landing hits. Then of course we have a handful of stealth killers, who completely go undetectable, and a decent chunk of them enjoy going for hit and run, which is what Beast of Prey is trying to reward. This is all to say Beast of Prey, and what it was attempting to do, has been demolished by other perks and killer power concepts in execution. Now onto the review of the flaws. And don't worry, it will last longer than Beast of Prey. The perk has a hefty cost with a beyond pathetic reward. The reward itself is extremely flimsy for utilization, even after its buff, and the perk's identity has been fulfilled with new perk and killer additions to the game. Beast of Prey is a perk that does not need buffs. It needs a complete overhaul, as the perk just does not have anything special about it anymore. Not only has Undetectable been experimented with many times before, but bloodlust manipulation has always been a very heavy discussion point, as most view the system to be flawed. There is a big reason why behavior have rarely experimented with bloodlust manipulation perks after Beast of Prey, and it's because of how annoying the system can be. If behavior wanted to change the perk quickly and not pass it a second thought, reintroducing the 25-second duration it had, just like how they did on the PTB, would be a boring but serviceable change. That being said, I would increase the timer to be at least 40 seconds, as the 20 on the PTB is way too short, to allow the killer to swap between survivors for hit and run plays. That being said, it's not a change that I am a big fan of, but it would at least be something. Instead, I believe the perk has the chance to go for a more dynamic change, and many of you might actually be intrigued by the rework I came up with. The second change is a rework focusing on the perk's stealth element, attempting to push the perk for the identity it wanted, but giving it even more. The perk now activates once you hook the obsession, where after starting a chase with any non-obsession survivor, you gain the undetectable stats effect for 45 seconds. If you down a survivor while Beast of Prey is active, the downed survivor becomes the new obsession. This is a new direction for Beast of Prey, allowing it new support tools with the obsession-related perks and giving it a hefty reward of applying multiple times, by committing to chases and gaining stealth play. Additionally, it does not take away from any of the other obsession-related perks. Furtive Chase grants Undetectable and Haste from hooks, but Beast of Prey needs you to start a chase just to gain Undetectable for a longer time. Additionally, it keeps away from supporting Rancor, as you only apply the obsession change from downing when Beast of Prey has Undetectable. This can only activate realistically once, compared to Game of Foot or Nemesis, so it instead pushes for a different obsession strategy. It's a unique obsession perk that matches the identity it wanted in the first place, but it's a glow up I would want to truly see for the perk. Beast of Prey is just bad. The perk has never gotten a chance to even be usable for the almost 8 years of its existence, and although Huntress's other perks are not that great, they at least have seen some usage from players. I feel bad for Beast of Prey, as it was a botched experiment from back when behavior were not entirely sure of how they want to utilize certain parts of the game, and all it has done is rot away. I personally dislike the recent buff to Beast of Prey, as it is a very lazy change just for behavior to remove the BP booster that realistically didn't even provide much benefit to players. Come on, behavior. Give Beast of Prey the update it deserves, not whatever you slapped in front of us. Overall, Huntress's perks are just sad to talk about. They're all quite bad compared to the many other perks that exist within the game, but players through sheer spite manage to find some use out of them, with Beast of Prey being left in the dust, just like where Behavior left it. It's a shame that these perks have been left to crumble for as long as they have, but with how often Behavior have been willing to experiment with perk design and balance in recent years, I do really hope that these perks will receive some special treatment. Huntress was the first year anniversary killer for the game. It's about time her perks reflect the bright future Dead by Daylight has left for its future players. With all that said and done, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Consider doing the funny YouTube stuff, and I wish you all good luck in your games, everyone. You will need it for what Freddy has been dreaming about.